Okay, so welcome to the Wisdom of the Pathwork. And we're here just to explore another Pathwork lecture. This is a series of lectures that were channeled 1957 to 78. So this is September 19th, 1973. It's one of the latter ones. It's lecture 213. And the title is The Spiritual and Practical Meaning of Let Go and Let God. So, as people know, just feel free to chime in with any questions or comments, or, and we'll read a little bit and try to leave space as well. So, open to sort of just the presence of these words, as if they were coming in now, and oftentimes I do feel still a sort of, power in the channeling, and there's a kind of energy with it. So see if that might be the case for you as well. So greetings and divine blessings for all of you here, my dearest friends. With joy and love, I resume a new working season to give you all the assistance and guidance you could possibly require. Your growth continues to the degree you truly desire it. It has already borne wonderful fruit and will continue to do so. Every one of you may find in the words I am privileged to speak this evening what you most need now. If you try to listen with your inner ear, here comes Dominique. If you try to listen with your inner ear, see with your inner eye, feel with your innermost being, and let the doubting mind rest, you will find exactly what you most need for your development. Hey, welcome, Dominique.
Hey, guys.
Hello.
So I have spoken often the words, let go, let God. And when you meditate, you also occasionally utter these words. Let us examine the true meaning of let go, let God. For there is a lot more to this saying than meets the eye, my friends. Letting go obviously means letting go of the limited ego with its self-will, its narrow understanding, and its preconceptions. So like the ego that's, experienced life through the lens of the images, right? In the defenses. It means letting go of fears, distrust, misconceptions, and suspicion, which these days I think is really up for everybody, right? There's a lot of that in the world right now. But it also means letting go of the insistent attitude that says, in effect, I can be happy only if so and so does thus and thus, or if life responds exactly as I determine. This often appears as not wanting to give up something precious that is in itself legitimate and that you should indeed have. Does letting go of the little ego self-will mean having to settle for unhappiness and unfulfillment? Is the striving for fulfillment that falls under the category of letting go wrong? These questions are important, and we shall now deal with them. To let God from the center of your being, from your heart, from your innermost self, where God speaks if you wish to listen, that is truly the ultimate aim. Before this highest, most blissful and secure state can exist, obstacles and dualistic confusions must always be removed. So, to let go from the center of our being, where, we really, feel trust and everything, that's like where we want to let God and know that that's in the highest good for us, and that, we really align and are kind of surrendered and very happy in some way to allow the divine to order our lives, including maybe bringing difficulties or things that are challenging in some way. And yet I think we really understand that that's a part of achieving that great secure state, and that we have to go through the obstacles and the dualistic confusions so that they can be removed. So are people following that? Does that make sense? To let God from the center of your being, from your heart, from your innermost self, where God speaks if you wish to listen, that is truly the ultimate aim. And so, that requires like sort of a trust in what is unfolding as something of a divine will, and as ultimately something trustworthy and exactly what we need. And to get to that place where we can let go of duality, let go of our fears, let go of our lower self, and have that level of allowing, of trusting, of surrender, to life as it is, which I think is really what the best we can understand is how God is in our lives, is showing up with what is here now, and that to sort of surrender and accept that, at least temporarily, to allow being with it and the movement to see where it goes. And oftentimes it's been my experience that what I saw maybe as dangerous or not a good thing, as I just breathed through it and allowed it as much as possible, I began to understand how it was trustworthy and how it was exactly what was needed. And it's hard, we don't see that when we are working through our obstacles and our dualistic confusions. So it is usually so much easier to comprehend a philosophical concept or spiritual premise in general terms than in its everyday application. Your mundane reactions seem often too puny and insignificant to be connected with the greater issues of life. Yet it is exactly in making the connections in the so-called insignificant area that you can find the key to your confusions and conflicts, which make it impossible for you to actually apply the great spiritual truths to your daily lives. Let's deal with the confusion I mentioned. The great truths, as all things, can be distorted and expressed in a false way. Thus, many people are aware of the truth that the universe is benign and giving, and that they are not required by divine law to suffer. But in their present state, they attempt to bring about the fulfillment they so ardently desire with their self-will. To tell these people that they must let go of their forcing current seems to imply resignation to emptiness, suffering, pain, and unfulfilled longing. To avoid this, they then hold on in a tight, squeezed way that prohibits the influx of the greater world that is light, truth, love, abundance, and all imaginable fulfillment. So the divine influx can only flow in its own harmonious rhythm when it is let loose. Energetically, there must be no hard knots. Like even, we can feel in our bodies, the tensions, the resistances, the blocks that we call them, right? And then self-will, anxiety, insistence, forcing currents, and distrust create an energetic climate that prohibits the divine flow. So, like when we contract, right, in all of those states, that which is of naturally trying to happen and bring us to the movement that will give us what we long for, is we're unconsciously blocking it. And then this state of consciousness that produces these tight, untrusting, insisting attitudes is antithetical to divine consciousness. An imbalance of trust is at work here. The little limited ego is trusted, while the greater divine self is negated. This does not mean that the ego should be denied, but it needs to expand its creativity and wisdom precisely by allowing the divine influx to occur. So do people have, examples of understanding about this, or, does this resonate with something that you've experienced before?
Um, the contraction unconsciously blocking uh, the connection to God, and um, where I tend to um, have this thing where I believe that you know it's not a benign universe, and this is and all the cruelty is what it is, and I just tend to accept the negativity in the world and in my life, and it
Yeah,
unconsciously blocks what I want.
yeah, good. Yeah, and it's like, it does feel like a little bit, maybe, to our rational ego mind, somewhat, like wishful thinking, and we've all prayed and hoped for what we wanted, and it doesn't seem to happen, and so then, why do we believe that there's anything out there that really even cares about it, So, yeah. And then it's in our separation, at one level that we, go to the ego, but in the same way, to go beyond separation, we have to recognize how going to the ego then, limits us from, experiencing this connection and this larger sort of flow and support, even in the hard stuff. I mean, life is life and death, and there are some really difficult times that we have to go through, but I think the more that we can relax and, at least, like have some kind of sense of, something moving through us, something carrying and caring for us that is, like sort of in the universe at large in some way. I think it gives us comfort. It brings us some sense of greater ability to relax. Like I often feel like I have to lie down on the ground to let go. And that's because I can feel that there's something under me supporting me, and holding me that I can let go into. So I find that until I can feel something of this support, it's hard to let go. And then it's hard to feel the support unless we let go. So, and if I stay tense and keep holding while I'm lying down, I will definitely, not feel that contact, that connection to the ground, that support, and my body won't be able to relax and allow the flow to happen. So, as you know, all attitudes create energy systems. The tightness of holding on creates a closed energy system. This can be easily observed on the outer level, wherever tyranny and domination exist, because the will of a few power-driven individuals imposes itself over others, stemming from and creating more fear. The creative spark is squelched. A closed system always creates resistance, even though temporarily some people outwardly submit to the force out of their own fears and weakness. But the time must come when every last fearful individual will stand up and throw off the shackles. History has always borne this out. In the confused human mind, this healthy movement is often taken for a general rebelliousness, coupled with and nourished by a childish will to refute genuine authority, true guidance, and the need for self-discipline and self-responsibility. So that's an interesting distinction he's making there. I don't think I remember connecting with that before. Inwardly, however, people do rebel against the momentary uncertainty of stepping into an apparent vacuum created after they have given up their tight self-will and have begun to let go. Instead of trusting the letting go process, people trust their own false gods. In relationship, it is easy to observe that the inner pressure of the subtle forcing current, which says, "You must love me," creates exactly the opposite of the desired response. As an individual, you may feel it is impossible to give up this demand because you cannot stand not being loved. Aren't you entitled to love? Doesn't the universe grant you this very necessary fulfillment? How can you give up the demand and content yourself with the bleak emptiness that you fear when you didn't renounce this demand for love, right? So you can see how, we teeter-totter, between this tense forcing current and this kind of collapse that seems, totally bleak and totally empty and, the greatest thing that we fear. And we can maybe even flip-flop back and forth, we fall into, collapse, and then we can't stand to be there because it's too empty and bleak, and so then we get up and we try to force it again, and that doesn't work, and we end up empty and frustrated again, and we flip-flop back and forth between these two states. And in a way, this is kind of the will, right? How the will works. And the will is a little different than the emotional aspect of ourselves, and requires a slightly different approach. So it's good to just notice, like, this kind of back and forth dynamic that we have internally with our will. And basically, in a sense, well, you could say that we're searching, but we don't know how to get there to this thing that's in the middle. That is this surrender. That is this letting go. But, it's like it feels like we can't find it, and we're, tense and forcing, or we're collapsed and hopeless. So, it's clear that the very attitude of "you must" elicits, resistance, anything else but love from the other, right? So love cannot blossom in a closed energy system. Somebody's just coming in. Is
And
that you, Frank, again? Oh, maybe it's... Okay. Welcome, whoever it is. Oh, hey, Skylar.
even if
Welcome.
it's a soft, it's
Say again, Davis.
even if it's like a soft demand for love where it seems like um very very loving. Please love me. I'll do whatever you want. Just please love me. It's like it is a demand
Yeah.
still.
Yeah, good. Excellent. Yes. Yes, our pleading, and kind of like in a way, we're trying to get them to empathize with our suffering or our need, somehow. And again, the child, that's natural. Like the child expects that the parent will empathize with that that need and come, right? And then when it doesn't, the child doesn't understand that. Like, and we just keep trying again and again and again, even when with certain people that won't work for sure. And and then, yeah, it gets, it doesn't work, and it goes more and more into the demand and the frustration with it, and we keep trying, even though it doesn't work, we keep trying again and again. So that's kind of like, where we know, like, okay, I've been there, done that a million times, or we see that energy that we can feel like this wall that, we keep sort of butting our head into. And, then we either collapse or, we're actively trying to break through. And, and we got to find something in the middle of that. And that's the challenge, like what does this thing look like even? So love cannot blossom in a closed energy system that stems from distrust, non-love, power, and distortion of truth. It cannot breed love. You who do the inner work of the path constantly encounter in yourself this tightness, this fearfulness, this holding. You may call it resistance or give it other names. Basically, the resistance is not against any human being, helper, therapist, or teaching, or even against any actual domination. For you do not need to be tightly holding against actual domination. The tight holding, the not letting go, always points to the inner spiritual struggle about what to trust, the little ego or God within. In order to do the latter, the interim states of consciousness which the mind has produced and wishes to avoid must be traveled through. The self wishes to avoid what it has produced only too often, whether it be the pain, the confusion, the emptiness, or the fear. So again, this is in our, work with acknowledgement, like we can't avoid, we need to acknowledge all of these aspects of that are arising inside of us. And whatever the interim state, you must embrace it so that it can be explored, understood, and thus dissolved. So this work that, we do, within, my understanding, really a useful tool is this inner relationship focusing. It's exactly kind of what it's designed to help us do. So there's an enormous difference between believing that this temporary state is the final reality, which must be kept at bay, and knowing that it is a temporary condition. Now, for some of us, it's been with us a long time, so it's kind of sometimes hard to see it really as a temporary thing. But we have to remember that all that time also we've been in our forcing current or in our collapse, and so it's kind of like it's just been waiting there for us to find our way through. And so it's been with us a long time, but that doesn't mean it's not a temporary condition. So as long as you believe this condition is final, the self will either fight against letting go of it, or it will fall into a resignation to being helpless and unhappy. So this is such a important, beautiful key here, right? It's like, and so we need to just really remember, that life is change and nothing is ever a total final condition. That we are just always moving through this, soul material that is a part of this journey for us. And, like once we recognize, even if it seems like slow as a glacier to be moving, that life, kind of moves without us pushing it, that it's better for us and it will move more easily, if we just relax and in that, open a little more to the flow, that we can begin to trust that, if we really feel like it's a permanent temporary thing, all we can do is hold on and sort of, to me it feels like we're just enduring. I've been in many places where, it's uncomfortable or I don't like the condition, and it feels like that's what my go-to is I just kind of hunker down, contract everywhere, and just kind of grumpily endure the whole thing for however long until it's finally over and I can breathe again. But that's the kind of thing that, like when we do that, we could be working that in a way that, would just gently and lovingly like acknowledge again that that's the go-to, but that we can see like, well, that's not, doing anything but making us sort of feel, like life is just an endurance contest, and we don't care for that. So there's this way that we want to try to help ourselves, like this is like the higher self guidance can come in, the self in presence can say to us, this is why I like these lectures, is they kind of tell us what the self in presence understands and knows. And so we come in and say, you can relax, it's like it's easier that way, and it's not a permanent state, it's temporary, and it will pass, and we can relax, and that makes it even move easier than when we tense. Back up here, or something is why the resistance is. So, let me read this again. As long as you believe this condition is final, the self will either fight against letting go of it, or it will fall into a resignation to being helpless and unhappy. That is why the resistance to letting go is so strong. You prefer the status quo in which you avoid falling into these other states of consciousness of your creation that must be traversed before you can let go and begin to create and expand your life. You prefer the status quo even though the state of letting loose and letting God feels wonderful, rich, light, joyful, and safe. Many of you have begun to experience this more often. In that way, the resistance to letting go does diminish gradually. It can never be done in one single decision. It is a decision and commitment that must be repeated many, many times. So like we resist letting go because sort of in the moment to let go, we have to drop in to feeling, sort of like these parts of us that are in their states of grief, of suffering, of incompleteness, of disharmony, and again, the guide is always inviting us, that to like feel and be with those aspects and, not try to resist them, because it really is where we can, be the space in which we can hold them and relax as well, to allow some of that resistance to let go and diminish gradually. Any comments or questions here? Is this making sense?
I have a comment. Um, I was kind of lost in the title of this lecture before we even got started. To me, it was always like let go and let God guide your life. But really, what it is let go of your resistance and let the divine in and out of you. It's like I'm catching it
Yeah.
from a whole different angle tonight.
Great. That's great. And I think you're right on. That's the well put. Yeah. And I get it. I understand that. I think oftentimes we do, hear that and sort of don't quite see the fullness of it. So thank you. So the tightness you feel is so often traceable to the current, which says, I want it desperately. However, the desperation is much more a result of the tightness that shuts out God than of not having what you want. And it's kind of like it's a vicious circle, right? Like the tightness prevents it, and then we get more and more desperate. But I think that's what he's saying, like that the desperation is much more a result of the tightness that shuts God out. And so, like, yeah, in a way, he's saying, that even not having what we want is, a problem, but maybe not a desperate problem. But what's a desperate problem is shutting God out. That there is a way that, we need that connection with the divine within ourselves. And, having what we want is one thing, but having that connection is so, important for us. So the state of tightness stemming from fear, the distrust, and a concept of poverty seem to justify your holding on. So that tension, that tightness stems from fear, distrust, not enoughness, and that's why we feel we have to hold on. I repeat what I mentioned before. The giving up of the tight self-will implies, first of all, letting go of the insistence of your wish, of your way, of your, what you want. The wish must be let loose for the moment, which is quite different from giving it up forever. So this is an important thing, right? Like we often feel like sort of that's like submission. Oh, I'm never going to have it. I just have to suffer and be miserable. And so he's saying, it's like the letting go is a giving up of this insistent tight demand, our will, our want, our way. Um, but it's like it doesn't make what we do long for or our desires bad or wrong, right? It's just, again, if they're in this insistent tight forcing current, they kind of are just backed up and blocked. Everything gets constipated in a way. And so there's this way that if we can trust that what we want, especially, if it's a good thing, we want to love, we want to give, we want to share, we want to, connect, that longing, is, very much what God wants for us as well. And then, what has to be, in a way, is something, within ourselves, our confusion and our dynamics. So, if we can let loose a little bit, and again, it's this way of just looking at, okay, so can I let go of the forcing current or the demand right now, relax a little more into not having it, feel the truth of, the part of me that wants it so desperately, acknowledge it, but sort of guide it, take its hand and say, you're real, I honor you, I acknowledge, this longing, this need, and, it's not something that, even in spite of appearances, that God wants you to be without forever, but because of this tight forcing current, we just have to let go enough to allow the flow to get reestablished. And so I don't know if you can feel that inside of you, like try to apply it to some of your own inner forcing currents around things. Can people find an example of that within yourself? And just see what does that mean? What the heck is he talking about, to sort of just let go, not give it up completely, but let go of the insistence of the wish. Again, the wish must be let loose for the moment, which is quite different from giving it up forever. The who, where, what, when, and how of the wish fulfillment must be temporarily given up. When you have let go, you may even come back to the same who, where, what, when, and how. But these wishes will then manifest in a different emotional and spiritual climate. So again, we won't have that kind of harsh forcing current. So, and that's what we're trying to do, is shift that climate. Often your insistence to have the wish fulfilled in the one specific way that you now imagine limits the actual fulfillment. Give the creative process rope and margin, and you will then experience that it will by far surpass your hopes and visualizations in happiness and fulfillment. I love that, right? Give the creative process rope and margin, And you will then experience that it will by far surpass your hopes and visualizations in happiness and fulfillment. Since your mind is often incapable of even conceiving the richness of the universe, you must learn to make yourself empty at the moment and allow the divine process to reveal itself to you. This means letting God. It is sometimes true that you must give up the desire of the self-will which you do not want to let go of. But this is only temporarily true. If you have inwardly accumulated a negative image of your life in which you can only suffer, then you must examine and oust this image so as to inactivate its energetic power. This cannot happen in a state of holding on and fighting against this same innermost negative belief. Right? And that's what we hold on to it and we try to get it to change. And, we're doing both at the same time. And so we get absolutely nowhere. Right? And so, it's an unconscious way that we do it. And so if you send out currents of domination over others with whom you are involved in relationship, if you fight against their imperfections and the immaturities that hurt you, it is only because you do not trust that your inner God can produce fulfillment for you without having to change others, impose your ideas over others, no matter how right these ideas may be in theory. So that's an interesting statement there too. I think I'll reread it. If you send out currents of domination over others with whom you are involved in relationship, and that could be directly, or it could be passive aggressively, or it could be, just even fighting against their imperfections and immaturities that hurt you. It is really what's really going on. I mean, that's all happening, right? But at some deeper level, the discomfort, the pain, the desperation that comes, it's only because we don't trust that the inner God can produce fulfillment for us. So we're looking outside and saying, it's not here because you did it to me, or you're the one that's the problem, you're in the way, and we want to blame them and make them get rid of them or whatever. And so again, we're out of directing this thing where it's really this understanding that there's something more within us that is our divine self, and that within and outside and all around us wants to provide this fulfillment for us, and it wants to allow that to just kind of be a part of a tapestry that's being woven over time, and magnetizing and calling all of the forces, everything that we need. It's kind of a alchemical and mystical process, right? And we don't know it, and we don't trust it, and we think we have to make it happen. And so this is part of the ego just has to try to test it, relax a little, surrender a little to see what happens. And it's not easy, but I think we do end up discovering that the results are really quite amazing, and that helps us realize, there is somehow a conscious universe and a conscious divine self within me that are part of this journey, and I can trust and have support in that way. So if you send out, okay, I think I read that also. Let's see. If we don't trust our inner God, then we have to impose on others, and that doesn't work. So humanity is caught in this conflict. You either hold on against the blankness, pain, and abandonment you fear will be your fate if you let go, or you resign yourself to this dismal state in order not to hold on. The universal conflict is part and parcel of the dualistic state of mind which prevails in your dimension of consciousness. You have often heard me explain that there are many other confusions and conflicts from which humanity must laboriously find its way out. In this particular instance, humanity's conflict is between either using a forcing current or resignedly accepting a negative state, becoming hopeless, and harboring a negative concept of life. This conflict seldom applies to all areas of life expression, but it almost always applies to some. So see if you can take a minute and just feel, where this might be in you. Where is it that you are using this forcing current, even if it's just emotionally or an inner felt, demand on yourself or on, other people that you may not ever express, but you feel, or you're, just kind of giving up and resigningly accepting, everything is hopeless and life is shit, let's go eat worms. So, was somebody wanting to say something? So this conflict seldom applies to all of our areas of life, but see if you can find some area that might relate to you. You may outwardly tend more toward one of these attitudes, but the other also lives within you, concealed even from your own awareness. Let us say that you are outwardly forceful, aggressive, and temperamentally suited to get away with overriding others by sheer force, clever persuasion, or dishonest manipulation. In that case, you use some of your resources to cover up resignation, despair, and distrust of life, though you do this in certain areas only. Or you may be outwardly a personality type who wants above all to get along with others, who wants to depend on them and not antagonize them. Then there must be underneath that the desire to dominate. Often such domination is obtained by submission. I will do what you say so that you are bound to me and will have to obey my wishes, right? This is part of the love mask, it's like I'll take care of you, but secretly underneath there is that demand, that expectation that, you're taken care of, back. And so, it's like a transaction and a bargain. Love is not love freely given. It's, I'm loving you in order to get my needs met. I'm being good to you. I'm taking care of you. I'm doing whatever I'm doing in a nice way or whatever. But, it's not coming from my heart. It's coming from my calculation that this is what I need to do to get what I need from you. And then it says, so if you say, I will do what you say so that you are bound. Somebody wanted to say something?
No, sorry.
So you will be too guilty to offend me when I have proven to be so obedient to you. So, like we're manipulative, right? Guilt tripping them. I venture to say that you must have found such hidden attitudes in the course of your pathwork. Whatever the outer manifestation of these two ways to react in life may be, the opposite of the overt manifestation must also exist in you. You may have become quite aware of the manifest attitude, but you still may be deluded in thinking that the opposite does not exist in you. Whoever is outwardly dominant will find it difficult to deal with the inner hopelessness. Whoever is outwardly negative, dependent, weak, and submissive will find it difficult to deal with his or her covert, dominant, and manipulative traits. They are inevitably two sides of the same coin. It's all about getting our way. I watched myself, I was in the dentist's office, and I wasn't expecting, the sensitivity of the teeth, and he had to do this procedure with this glue, and I don't know, seemed like it was lasting forever, and, it was kind of shocking. I wasn't expecting it, and we weren't numb, and, and so and my body just started like reacting and hollering. and there was a part of me watching this, and wondering, like, well, is this just my body kind of responding, or is there some, part that, like, has to let them know that they're doing something terrible to me and I don't like it or something. And so there's, these ways that I could feel a little bit, like it was a natural response in some ways, but it was also, it had an element, I think, of some, manipulative need getting involved in that, maybe even getting them to pay attention and stop doing it, or something, like trying to, change what was happening. So at the beginning of the path of self-exploration, you may not be aware of even your overt personality aspect. But little by little you observe yourself, you will become aware first of the overt and then the covert side. When your personality is very adept in its chosen way of dealing with the world, in other words, we're good, we get our way, like if we're in the dominant, or, or we feel somehow, comfortable in the negative unhappiness, right? When we find it difficult to recognize the hidden aspect. If you are forceful by nature and have aspects of strength that you partially put into the service of the forcing current, then for a long time you may get away with a solution for warding off the disaster you secretly expect. If you are by nature soft and pliant, but use these assets in order to manipulate others and hide the domination you wish to exert, you may find it extremely difficult to give up the former and face the latter. If you seem to get what you want through your chosen way, which is predominant in your personality, it is much harder for you to see what you miss. Only when life finally brings home to you that your succeeding is an illusion, and that you are actually fighting an already existing state of emptiness, which is the result of your chosen solution, then you will be sufficiently motivated to deal with this struggle. So, questions, comments, or just making sense to people? You may momentarily seem to get, or even actually, get what you want, but you do not really get what you yearn for. You do not get the real fulfillment. I felt that before, like I finally got what I wanted through forcing current or through, and then, like, it didn't really feel like, since I didn't get it from being freely given, or, whatever, it didn't feel like it was really what I wanted, right? You do not get the real fulfillment you continually make impossible by the very use of these pseudo-solutions. Let us assume you wish love and closeness with another human being, but feel uncertain that you will obtain this desire through the other person's own free will. Let us further suppose you then rule by possessiveness, domination, jealousy, coercion, and demands. Remember that this can occur in either the overt or covert way, and that you can rule just as much by dependency, by blaming and making the other person feel guilty. If that person partially truly loves you, but partially neurotically needs you or wants to exploit you, he or she will submit to your rule, but will also resent and blame, hate and defy you for it, even though being party to the arrangement. Thus, even when you succeed, it means little, because you are constantly fighting against those reactions for which you are co-responsible. These negative reactions in the other only strengthen your negative image of life. And so it goes on and on. But what will happen if you have the courage and integrity to let the reins go? Notwithstanding the fear that you might lose this person. If you lose, what have you lost? But if you win, you find the immense joy of discovering that the other wants to love you freely, without your coercion, manipulation, and domination. That is the true richness you long for. That's what we really want, is people spontaneously, naturally just wanting to love us, right? And even if you lose that person, does this truly have to mean that you must be alone forever? Certainly not. But you may temporarily have to dip into your bleakness so as to dissolve its power to present an obstruction. In that way, you can let God. Divine creation wants you to have all the bliss imaginable. If you can confront your doubts that the best could indeed be yours, then you can establish trust. But trust and faith cannot be built on the rotten foundation of distrust and lack of faith. If all the energy you now use to coerce and bend your environment could be used to establish genuine faith in the abundance of life, in the richness your life could have, you would indeed create such a rich life. Covering up your lack of faith, your distrust, your negative outlook, and then covering up the means you use to overcome them consumes valuable, essential creative energy. Does that make sense? Like we're, using all of this energy to kind of manage the situation that could be, actually put in service of, working towards this, I don't know, like letting go is a kind of risk, so we have to build the courage. We have to, hold ourselves, to jump off that cliff and trust that we, won't crash to the cliffs below, So I specifically suggest that all of you look at both the overt and covert manifestations of this struggle in you and see in what areas of your life they exist. Look at your lack of faith when you do not let God, when letting go seems to connote resignation into an unfulfilled state. When, feel the inner movement in you when you cease grabbing, or cease, feeling like you have nothing to grab, then visualize yourself in a confident, patient, humble state of mind. Like, it's a kind of receptive space, right? Like with hope, that the divine, like he says, like longs to give us everything that we want, and that we don't know, and we're confused sometimes, and so, we're trying to learn, and we're humble, and we're seeking, and in our hearts we long for abundance and love and good stuff, right? And God, how can God refuse when we're like that? Now, God can't just kind of drop it all in our laps. So, we have to hold this space and let it gradually, open into this natural ongoing flow, of life. And, that still includes, love and loss of love and life and death and pleasure and pain. But there's something around, like knowing the fullness of life. And then we find also the fullness of life, even in sometimes the pain and the difficulties. Whether you experience your outer holding or your outer hopelessness, try to get in touch with the hidden opposite attitude. So tune in, like which is your dominant, or what are you doing right now? Is there outer holding or outer hopelessness? And then whatever that is, see if you can find, buried inside of you somewhere this opposite attitude. Saying both facets should be on the surface so you can become fully conscious of them. And only then will you be able to find the key, which I will describe to you now. However, just hearing about this key can never be sufficient, although it will surely help you find the right direction. It requires a great deal of inner work for you to use this key. First, I would like to say a little more about letting go and letting God in your interactions with others. I have already mentioned the apparent conflict of wanting to be loved, respected, and appreciated, and your pushing for it. I also spoke about your dilemma of apparently having to give up this wish, and your confusion about whether you are entitled to it or not. It is so important to restate that no rightful claim you make on creation can be accommodated by the universe when your condition is a cramped, forcing, hopeless, negative one. Nor is the attitude of "you must love me" an expression of genuine love on your part. Love and must are antithetical. Forcing does not allow freedom for the other, to the other, whereas an open energy system always functions in freedom. We may not, feel this must, like consciously. So, and it's kind of like then, like without it, then we go into that hopelessness, if we can't sort of have our will met, and have somebody love us, then we're forever doomed and unloving, empty of that, right? So, we got to find a way to trust that the lack of what we long for in the present moment, is not a permanent lack, but is now created within us sort of by the backwash of our either using, like flip-flopping between our forcing current and our collapse. And so then we're spinning in this kind of cycle, that doesn't have the key and can't establish, like the openness to this larger reality that the universe just wants to give this to us. We don't have to control it. We don't, we just have to open to receive it. The attitude characteristic of an open energy system would be somewhat like this. I would like you to love me. You seem to be the person I would like to share myself with, and to whom I would like to give all of myself. If you are that person, I know that you must come to me in freedom, out of your own volition. Even if my forcing could affect you, I would not want it in this way. I trust the universe to give me what is my fair due. If you do not wish this freely, I can let you go from deep within and wait in faith that the person who will appreciate and freely want what I have to give will come to me. So, and this is, very clearly about, our mate, our partners, but it can be, anything that we want in a way, right? And so, some of us I know are, this wish makes total sense, and this prayer, this attitude, try it on for size. And then if you're not in that stage of life or, in that place, what is it that, you're missing? What is it that you long for? And see if this might apply, the same prayer, some particular way. A closed energy system with an attitude of tightly holding on is really your false and inefficient weapon against a negative vision of the universe you live in, or at least against a vision of life for you. The weapon is wielded with ever stronger forcefulness as it proves itself inefficient. You become more forceful more possessive or more hopeless, more demanding, more jealous, more domineering, or more collapsed, I suppose. It's not saying that, but I'm reading into it. Thus, the energy system closes more and more tightly and shuts out life's riches. Your illusion of life's negative nature is strengthened, and you fight against this illusory negative vision so as not to fall into the pit of resignation and giving up instead of just letting go. So I'm just curious, does everybody recognize this to some degree in their own lives? This sort of like forcing current versus, collapse. And
Yes.
so, yeah. So it's like, I think it's a very important, key here. And it's a tough one, because the will works a little differently. But I think if we can be really aware of the kind of both of those sides and feel the energy that's invested in them, and then kind of keep dropping in, well, the guide says the key is, to let go, to let God, like what the heck in that does that mean, in this moment now, or how possibly does one do that, right?
I
Um,
I think it's interesting, Darlene, the balance between the allowing yourself to have the desire
uh-huh.
and also letting it go, if that makes sense. Because I think there's this easy way to go black and white, and if you're not seeming to get what you want, then you want to shut down the desire and act like, well, I don't want that anyway. But then this isn't talking about not wanting it. It's saying to you can want it truly and still hold it lightly and give it back to the higher will. If it is the higher will and in the best interest of all parties, then it can be. But it's like I don't know. I had a hard time for a long time to like allow myself to be seen wanting, knowing that I might not get it, and still allow myself to want.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, disappointment, like for all of it, a lot of us, especially as children, and yeah, it's like wanting is such a vulnerable place, right? And we don't like that, like that wanting and waiting and not knowing, and and then we start reading into not getting it, that must mean there's something wrong with me or something wrong with them, or so yeah, and there's this, you know, place that it is coming out of this like negative, assumption about life and about ourselves. So I think in a way it's useful because it brings this out of us so we can see it, But then again, from our higher self recognizing, oh, there's this parts of me, right, that believe that they have to, they're not going to really get it, or God doesn't, they're not worthy of it, or something like that. And then to again realize that you know that's a God image, maybe the way our parents were or other people, and so the real God truly does want us to have this kind of fulfillment, and wants us to like let him carry us to it almost, right? One of my hymns talks about like we can, we want to push this river to get what we want, to get to where we want, we have to, be in this forcing current. And, the truth is, the higher self comes in and says, you don't have to push the river. You can let it carry you, you know, like relax, relax.
Well, and the
So,
other piece that it kind of talks about in mainstream like psychology or couples counseling, there's this, you have to speak your needs, and that's true, but then there's this ironic thing that people talk about happening of if I have to tell you to do it, then it doesn't count, you
yeah,
know? And it's what this is saying is like unless it's done spontaneously, and people are like, no, you have to tell them, but there is something to that like very common if I have to tell you to do it, then I know you're just doing it because I told you to do it. Whereas we want to be loved spontaneously. But I think sometimes we look at the ways we want to be loved versus the ways we are being loved, and looking at the lack instead of what's there.
Right. And then we kind of go into the complaint or the demand about it, which, backs them off into, like
Defend.
not feeling like they want to give, from,
Mhm.
and yeah, so it does, it creates this vicious circle. I think in that instance, a lot of times, right, it is like the guide has another lecture on, the real adult need is to give rather than to get. And I know we still want to get, and we need this true, real love, but there's some way in which where it's not there. I think a lot of times rather than pointing our finger or saying, give me that if we give what we want to receive, I know a lot of times when I was doing TP at Seven Oaks, and at first I didn't know if my husband would be, good with all of that. And I would, come home and, be filled with, the work that I'd done. And it's not something that he would want to necessarily talk about or share, but I would always feel like I was more in my heart, when I would come back. And then, I would just let that flow out, and, that I think rather than me sort of expecting him to be somehow unhappy with me, and then trying to tell him, that I needed to be independent and have my way. And, like it could have gotten this whole other, negative circle. And so like this benign circle can happen, when we trust again in the universe and, uh, like giving what we are wanting, and again, maybe there are ways that we can communicate, but yeah, it's a very tricky thing, um, when we, like even trying to communicate about sex or whatever, it makes us all weird and self-conscious and, feeling like we're having to perform instead of that spontaneity. And so, and it may be that also, like we have to let go of having to have it a certain way and receiving it the way it's being given. I know, like in some ways we want love to be a certain way, but for us, but our partners can only love us the way they know how to love. And, if we can't receive their love that way, we got to have the love some other way. That's very difficult. Like, how can they do that? So in some sense, we have to start at least, and maybe it grows and maybe it expands and new things come in, but we have to start like really receiving the love as it can be given, as they know how to give it. And we have to recognize, even though it's not exactly what we want, that it's coming from this place, and not reject it and not, want to control it in some way. Okay, so let's head back to the lecture. You have to live in an open energy system to reach out into life and comfortably, even confidently claim its riches. An open energy system. So imagine, like see in your mind, like do you have a closed energy system, and can you just take a minute and examine what that would feel like if you could open it? You must be rich yourself in order to be energetically compatible with the riches of the universe. In a closed energy system, you believe you are a pauper and never avail yourself of your wealth. Knowing your riches implies, as the first substantial step, being strong enough, generous enough, humble enough, honest enough, not to exert force over others, no matter how subtly this force may be acted out. Not letting go implies a forcing current. Forcing, no matter how concealed, amounts to stealing, because you would not have to enforce anything if it were indeed freely given you. The irony is that often what wants to be given you freely becomes inaccessible when you force. Not letting go must violate your integrity on a deep level, which then causes you to doubt yourself and your right to be happy. Not letting go can be equated with being a stealing beggar. Letting go can be equated with knowing one's ultimate riches and having the willingness to establish this fact in your consciousness. So again, as human beings, we may live in a state of, lack of this richness, in a certain level of our consciousness. But if we can hear the guide's words, if we can imagine this might be true, then, we can let go enough to discover that in fact it is the truth. So, it's kind of like, again, the letting go is necessary for us to even have the experience of this benign and generous universe. Letting go thus implies a hard, honest look at your illusions, your pretenses, and your dishonesties. As you know, thoughts and energies constantly create. There is an enormous difference between creating a closed system by manipulation of others, of facts, of events, which we have a lot of that going on in our world now, right? And of the creative energies around you, or creating an open energy system through trust. The key is letting go into trust. In order to trust, you must first establish certain intermediate links which cannot be skipped. Those links form the bridge to a state of genuine positive expectation of life, where there is no pressure, no anxiety, and no doubt. Instead, there is the deep faith that the universe is benign and that you can have the very best on all levels of existence. This is the key we are concerned with here. An open energy system in which you positively create fulfillment and enrichment requires that you discover your inner richness. You must become rich. If you start from your poverty, you can never create an open energy system. You can at best create a closed energy system in which you directly or indirectly rule, coerce, pressure, command, demand, and manipulate, and cheat. So are people following this? What does it mean, to have this open energy system internally? How do we, become rich instead of start from our poverty? If the truth is that a part of us has, grown up in some kind of lack and poverty, right? This is the difficulty with, our histories, because our very experience, imprints, these images within us. And the answer, is kind of the opposite of what we came to learn through our images. And so where we feel impoverished, where we experience lack, it's because we believe we're not worthy, or it's not available, or, something like that. And like what the guide is saying is everything we need is within us, and we have all of this richness. And that richness may not be here right now, but it's like part of the universe coming towards us. And if we get tangled up in trying to resist our lack or trying to manipulate our way, it's like we miss the incoming wave of the richness that we are. And again, I think I like that. We must become rich ourselves. It's like there's many other forms of richness. Like in our rich in our love, rich in our humor, rich in our qualities of creativity or positivity or something like that. So, and that again can't be something like masked or superimposed, or we should be that way. It has to come from within us. So the open energy system, which creates richness flowing into you both from within and without, must come from your own richness. And that richness can afford to lose at the moment. So, like what spins us is, we try to find our richness, and then in the moment, we recreate our lack. Or the image, proves itself. See, I knew I was going to get that job or that thing I really wanted, And so, like from that place, we can't forgive, we can't allow, we feel like it's just proof, a nail sealing the coffin of our life, and so we don't feel like we really can afford to lose in that moment. But if we're coming from our own richness, then yeah, it's a temporary setback. It didn't work this time, it's like, and yeah, maybe it's even a pattern, but I can, in my richness, I can discover what that pattern is and dissolve it and set myself free. So then you can afford to tolerate the temporary pain of finding what really obstructs the fulfillment of the unfulfilled need and ultimately remove it by changing an inner attitude. That is the way to create richness from poverty. A sequence of steps must be undertaken in this process. Step number 1, recognize the conflict we have just discussed where you struggle between resorting to hopelessness or to pushing, holding, and applying pressure from above. Step number 2, see that this conflict exists because you operate from the premise of an imaginary poverty, convinced that you do not have what you need. You would not have what you need if you gave up the pushing, holding, pressuring struggle. You believe that you are condemned never to experience the fulfillment you long for, without which your personality cannot thrive. Step number 3, commit yourself totally to working out the real reasons for your unfulfillment in the usual way. Lean on this path. This must be done in a spirit of honest perseverance, patience, and humility. Humility means not blaming the universe for your poverty in a particular area of your life, but instead searching for your distortions that have created this poverty. It also means not being ashamed of yourself, in having these distortions and creating this poverty, right? Humility is truly the leveler of pride and shame. And when we can, stand in that place, it really does set us free in amazing ways. So most human beings have some areas where they feel rich and some where they feel impoverished and therefore needy. It is hardly ever just one way. So discover the areas where you feel rich and where you feel poor. Perhaps you feel rich in having certain creative talents, where you feel completely confident and where you sense that you have this limited abundance within you like a stream that never ceases to flow. But at the same time, you may feel poor in regard to ever finding true mutuality. Another person may feel very secure in that area, but feels very doubtful about ever having abundance and security on the financial level. You all know by now how to search for the misconceptions, negative intentionality, and destructive attitudes that must underlie such a blocked condition. You have to be quite clear where you feel rich and where you feel poor. Where you feel rich, you will always be rich because there you must also have a giving and honest attitude. But where you feel poor, you will continue to be poor until you establish richness within through giving and honesty. In actuality, richness always exists with everyone. But if you do not know that you possess that richness and are blind to it, you will truly believe and experience only your poverty. The poorer you believe yourself to be, the more you must react as if you had nothing to give. Haven't you all found in your pathwork that you hold your feelings in check because giving them out would create unendurable emptiness inside you, an emptiness that can only be filled by others? Let us see what happens when you believe yourself to be poor. I said before that every kind of pushing, domineering, forcing, or manipulating amounts to cheating. The translation of such an attitude into concise words would be, I shall force you to give me what you do not want to freely give. If plain power is not adequate, I shall do so by trickery. I shall make you feel guilty for not giving me what I want from you. I shall accuse and blame you for victimizing me. I shall turn it all around and accuse you of doing what I secretly do to you. For instance, I shall claim that you dominate me because you refuse to comply with my goal to force you into submission to me. It is easy to see that this attitude has nothing to do with love. Such an attitude is unfair, cheating, prohibitive, and infringes on the other person's freedom, or at least attempts to do so. The free loving attitude characteristic of an open energy system says, I would be happy to have your love, but loving you, I shall give you the freedom to come to me if and when you so choose. If you do not wish to love me, I have no right to make you feel guilty by pretending that this devastates me. This is the true, honest decency and integrity that creates richness. You are entitled to want to be loved, or to have money, or to have fulfillment. But if you go about it in any other way, your means become prohibitive and in the deepest sense dishonest. Because you feel poor, you think you must steal. Because you continue stealing, you remain poor. For only the honest can feel deserving of riches. The energetic form of the forcing, holding attitude is that of a tight prison or a short leash. Stealing creates guilt, and the guilt produces doubt that you are entitled to receive freely. Right here you create for yourself a climate of impoverishment in which you must indeed doubt your capacity to create richness. You also violate spiritual law, and it is extremely important to find out in what way. During the process of self-exploration, you will find your lack of faith in a universe that will yield what it already wants to give to you. You make it impossible for the universe to give to you because of the closed energy system you have established. It is exactly the same in a relationship, even in the best relationship. If the most genuine love is forced and coerced, it will automatically be withheld. Your demand for love will be resented, even by those who comply out of their own erotic motives. You cannot receive the existing or growing love because your prohibitive energy form does not allow it. An attitude of unfairness and dishonesty is always present when you grab and do not let go and let God. So you see this as kind of this overarching thing now a little bit, like, whenever we're trying to control life, and we're, using some kind of manipulation, force, mask, process, there's a way that we're not trusting, we're not relaxed and letting go and letting God. And so the pressure creates counter pressure, where letting go affords the possibility to experience genuine divine law and to experience what is. Just even, letting go is letting go into what is, right? We're letting go into maybe our disappointment or into the loss or into the lack right now. But it's like it's in this moment, and it's not awfulized. It's not, it's like there's an understanding that probably we're creating it because of our, the healing journey that we're on. And that, by just being with it and being conscious that it opens this flow, and allows our own inner abundance and the universe's abundance to work through us. Whatever darkness or negativity may be there temporarily must be seen for what it is, so that its ultimate essence of light and beauty can reveal itself. Only when you can let go can others be free to love you. You may indeed be entangled in a relationship where love does not come forth freely. But this is only so because your distortions and your concept of impoverishment will draw to you someone who is incapable of giving you love. You may have to first let go of what you want from a specific person and accept the momentary apparent state of impoverishment and emptiness. Travel through this interim state until you can find through your own increasing inner health, freedom, and richness, that love is given to you freely. Once you have tasted the difference between what you get through pressure and control and what you get when you let free, you will never desire the former anymore. The former is indeed meaningless. It cannot enrich you because you extracted it out of your own sense of poverty. A false sense of poverty, but nevertheless a sense of poverty. The richness that is necessary for having, being, and living in an open energy system where people love richness, and the universe come to you freely, can only be created by you when you give as fully as you wish to receive. And again, a lot of times we'll give in order to get, so it's an interesting, so we want to give as fully as we wish to receive, but it's different than giving in order to get. This is why letting go so often means at first plunging into this inner negative world that you have created and hidden both from others and from your own awareness. But you should also remind yourself that this is not the ultimate you to which you are either doomed or from which you must hide. By admitting the existence of this negative part, you can change it. Honest self-facing includes courage and humility and never induces hopelessness. Even if you first examine the world of poverty you have created in your consciousness, experience its pain as a tunnel through which you travel in the spirit of facing your own creation. When you deny this process and choose instead to feel victimized by life because of the pain you yourself have created out of ignorance or dishonesty and negativity, you cannot help but stay poor. Out of that courage of really seeing yourself, the further attitude of letting go inevitably grows. This attitude says, if others want what I have to offer, I will gladly give it to them. If they do not want it, I will let them go. If this is painful, I will accept this pain and explore its origin in me. I will trust in the ultimate benign nature of life to give me what I need, even if at that moment I am still not capable of experiencing it. This meditation, my friends, must be the final step in the sequence I outlined. So you can extricate yourself from the incredibly painful and hopeless dichotomy in which all humanity is caught. One person may be more involved in it than another, even though some are caught in it only to a small extent. Nevertheless, every human being is trying to get out of this pattern. You create richness in an open energy system by seeing how your demands and your tight holding defeat your fulfillment and imply an insult to the universe. Then man says, I do not believe I can have unless I push, pressure, cheat, manipulate, and force it to come to me. When you undertake these steps, release first the holding, and then let go of what you acquired through this forcing attitude of self-will and pressure. This means you may not immediately obtain from the outside what you desire. You must first create the inner attitude in which you can accept the not having with good grace and still feel, perhaps even because of it, your inner wealth. So I think that's a kind of a key, where we can accept not having what we really long for, with good grace and feel, even in that poverty, still feel connection to our inner wealth. The capacity to do without what you want will enhance your self-esteem and your integrity. This will begin to enrich you from within, from your own resources. Then the fulfillment from without becomes almost secondary, in spite of there being often a genuine need for outer wish fulfillment. However, such fulfillment has to become a natural byproduct of your inner state. Also, it should not be something you cannot do without. If that is the case, you are centered in others and not in your own being. The outer fulfillment, important as it may be, is simply an organic development of your inner state. First, you must establish the inner state in which you can let go of what you want to have, even if this leaves you feeling empty, pained, and needy. However, do not lose sight of another state of consciousness in which you could flow if you did not resist your present state. So by accepting our empty, painful, needy state, something else, flows into us. And this is the way to establish the inner state of richness that is compatible with universal law in a creation forever ready to give you whatever you truly need for your happiness. So he's shifting topics a little bit here. So let me just pause. Any comments or additions there? So, he's talking about how, we kind of try to use our forcing current and guilt people. And so he now wants to say a few words about guilt, an especially important topic in this connection, and clarify the difference between guilt, shame, and remorse. I have often referred to justified and unjustified guilts. I have also spoken about the destructive nature of guilt, which devastates the self and prohibits the vision of your ultimate divine being. Now let us see in what way guilt, shame, and remorse differ from one another. When you feel guilt, you say in effect, I am beyond redemption. I deserve to be devastated. Since you are an integral part of creation, of the universe, of God, you thus insult yourself as you do when you do not trust life's abundance, goodness, safety, justice, richness, and beauty. No matter how negative, destructive, mean, malicious, spiteful, dishonest, and manipulative you discover a part of you to be, it is only one part, only a temporary aspect, which the real you has brought into material manifestation so you can recognize and alter it. Never think that this is all of you. You must beware of this dangerous distortion. There is a direct correlation between the self-devastating guilt and your distrust of life. It is essential that you deal with this double-edged distortion and set it right. In this kind of guilt, you inevitably cut yourself off from your own divine flow. Thus, you feel you have to immediately go to the opposite extreme of whitewashing your actual failings and faults, those areas which you need to face squarely and honestly. The defense against your shortcomings is always correlated with a self-devastating guilt, and the self-devastating guilt is correlated with the denial of the true nature of the all-giving, all-loving, all-fulfilling universe available to all created beings. Be aware of this guilt, my friends, for it does not lead to self-purification. It is not a realistic or constructive attitude. So the self-devastating guilt is correlated with the denial of the true nature of the all-giving, all-loving, all-fulfilling universe available to all created beings. Now, what about shame? Shame is the emotion concerned with vanity and appearance. Perhaps you are ashamed to expose something in front of others because you want to pretend to be other than you are. The idealized ego image takes predominance over what is real. Thus you lose touch with the treasure of your real self. So there is a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt relates to your inner self. It devastates you and you exaggerate it, playing a game with yourself. Shame applies to your image, your pretenses toward the world outside. True remorse has nothing to do with either guilt or shame. It simply recognizes your shortcomings, limitations, faults, impurities, and negativities. It admits that there are parts in you where you violate spiritual law and thus violate your deepest integrity. To feel regretful, to admit the truth that these impurities are a useless waste of energy and inflict harm on others and yourself, sincerely wanting to change through self-confrontation, is entirely different from self-devastating guilt or shame. Remorse makes it possible to say, yes, it is true, I have this or that dishonesty, pettiness, false pride, hatred, malice, or whatever, but this is not all of me. The very fact that I can recognize it, regret it, and want to change it allies me with my divine self, which will ultimately overcome whatever negative traits I feel remorseful about. The I that dislikes and wants to change destructive, untruthful, deviating aspects remains basically intact, even while noticing that something is amiss. So do make the distinction between guilt, shame, and remorse, and see that guilt is very much part of a lack of faith in all that is. My dearest beloved friends, there are many spiritual helpers around you and around everyone who is venturing on such a path of self-development. Some of you may doubt the reality of spiritual existence beyond the body, but whether or not you have these doubts, it is a fact. There is a whole world which for you is intangible, but which is extremely tangible in reality. In fact, it is much more tangible than the world you know as real. The world you know as real is a reflection, a mirror image, an outer projection into which your real self is thrust in order to fulfill a task. Give the free gift of real love by letting others be, even if this means a loss at the moment. Let go in trust and faith that life wants to shower you with its gifts. The more you establish an attitude of truth in you, the more you will know the inner beauty, the inner world of reality that can never perish. As you persevere on your genuine path, your growth becomes more and more tangible. It progresses in an ever-accelerating beauty as you master the difficulties. You resolve your problems in an ever more profound way, and your experience of joy and security, peace and pleasure become deeper, longer lasting, and less fraught with subsequent fearful contraction. You become more and more capable of fulfillment because of your honest investment in facing yourself in truth. Divine blessings are with you. Be in peace. So that was like a lot in that lecture. Any final comments, questions, thoughts from anybody?
Just a lot to chew on.
Yeah, I think I might even explore breaking that down with AI a little more and just kind of, because there's pieces of it that, like I definitely connected, but there were like levels of it that I could see, oh, there's something else that's in this that I'm not quite.
Yeah.
But I think that, mostly, I think that we struggle with this idea of letting go. I mean, I do, it's like my self-will is so strong and it just feels like death to have to let go of, and so I know, that kind of work of surrender, I think for all of us in many ways is just really like we have this work of facing our pain and our hurts and feeling our feelings and that, but I think that the deepest one feels for me anyway like this place of finding this surrender, that is trusting to let go for now, and it's if I give up, if I collapse, then I'm going to just bounce back into the resistance and the fight and the struggle and the forcing current again. So there's this middle place, and it's just an interesting. I don't know how many egos really know it very well because I think it's quite challenging, but I think that really is the key to finding our way out of even, like all this polarization and all of this, like how do we become a functioning democracy again? Like somehow, the my way or the highway thing, has to expand into something a little more. And somebody, right now, like this war will never end because, our president can't surrender. He can't lose. right? It's a win-lose thing, and he's so much into. So there's this way that, without recognizing that it's a zero-sum game, and yeah, somebody wins and somebody loses, but the whole world loses. you know, it's like, and to have some kind of ability to trust that even, if I let go here, that doesn't mean what I'm fearing, that there's some, creativity, some new, you know, possibility that can arise that will bring to us everything we need. It won't bring control, but, again, the trust and the connection that we have with each other. So, yeah, I'm rambling.
Yeah.
I think it's
No,
a closing time. Anybody else final words?
um, you know how before I left you said um how we like to get stuck in these negative places, and um we should instead ask God to show us the light because we're in the collapse because of the self will, and we try to keep with the forcing current, try to keep getting what we want, and when we don't get what we want, and it's like, oh my God, here we go, here's the collapse. We're not getting what we want, and then it's like you gotta kind of trust in God. Oh, I have this desire, and it's for a higher purpose, and then just let the benign universe do its work. But the little ego is gonna come in and give you all this evidence that it's not gonna happen. That there's no such thing as a benign universe. But it's just that trust and letting go is
Exactly.
what.
Yeah, that's right. And it is like you can't ever, like you can't, again, you can't let go until you trust, and you can't trust until you let go, right? So it's one of those chicken and an egg, you know, situations. And so to me, like, again, the courage of the heart, has to sort of begin to make sense of, seeing like, oh yeah, this is kind of just an impossible, dualism and dynamism. And so I'm gonna, like, it's like the Matrix, I'm gonna jump off the cliff. I'm gonna trust in something beyond the Matrix, because the Matrix just, it's too limiting. It doesn't make sense. It's like, and so to have the courage, though, we need to see how it doesn't fit, why it, and why we keep recreating it, and it's really not out there. So, and then we can begin to trust that we can open up and make that leap into letting go, without losing what's so dear to us and what feels so important, ultimately. Okay, well, lots of stuff here in deep places, but yeah, let's see if we can trust. I love, when he describes this universe as in its true nature, because it is. We live in a universe that is this image of, struggle and difficulty. And I think if we can imagine really that this whole universe is a benign conspiracy for our benefit, trying to give us everything we long for, loving us so deeply, that can maybe help us understand a little more clearly, who we are and where we are and what's trying to happen here. And the more that we can know that, I think then the more generous and the less demanding, the less controlling, the more free we can allow ourselves and each other to be. So, all right,
Thank you,
everybody.
Darlene.
Hey, have a good
Okay.
night.
Good
Good night,
night.
everyone.
Hi, thank you, Darlene.
Yeah. Take care.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.